In today's modern age, digital items can have a substantial real-life value, ranging from a mere few cents to thousands of dollars. Whether it be in-game skins, loot boxes, or an advantage over other players. But why do we as a consumer choose to spend real-life money on items or media that isn't real, spending money on something we can't physically hold in our hands? There's multiple issues that arise with this digital medium, the confusing notion that we don't actually own our digital games or items but are merely just renting a license. If the company chose to randomly shut down their service, as unlikely as that is, our purchases will be lost. This is a largely hypothetical situation to discuss, but it's certainly not something companies like Microsoft haven't thought about. In Microsoft's terms of service, it's stated, "You may lose access to or capabilities of digital goods, or have the nature of your access changed if we cancel or terminate the applicable service or cease supporting the applicable device. We sacrifice physical media for ease of access." But let's discuss something else, but somewhat in the same realm. Recently, I've been delving into the game Escape From Tarkov. It's a first-person survival shooter with MMO elements like persistent statistics. The basic premise of the game is you load into an instance, find loot inside that instance, and leave with said loot. Different parameters come into play, such as other players inside the same instance can kill you and take the items you've found and or brought into the instance prior. The player base has a big problem, and this can be said for other communities that base themselves around games that include persistent death, and this is gear fear. Gear fear is a mindset that's too afraid to lose your items, so you never take them into an instance and they'll just sit in your storage collecting dust. Instead, these players choose to play with just the default loadout, which includes a melee weapon. They do this because there's no repercussions to doing so yet and can yield a lot of potential rewards. If you die, you lose nothing. If you've entered an instance with a loadout full of gear and you die, that's potentially lost forever, which leads to anger and frustration. But why do these emotions correlate with losing items in-game? Items that aren't real. Items that don't have any real-world value. In my experience, there's multiple different reasons why we become annoyed when we lose our items. One of them being time. The time we invest into gathering up the items, the time we put into our character, the time we accumulate exploring and navigating the maps, killing others and taking their belongings. Time plays a massive role in RNG-based loot survival game. When you launch the game, how long it took you to turn on your computer, how much time passed when you were eating breakfast. Whatever you were doing prior to your engagement with another or that big item find was determined hours beforehand, and all the game had to do was change some data values for that to have an impact on your day and how you will inevitably play the game. If you find an item of high value, do you play more cautiously or sprint ahead to try and secure said item? But how do we know it's an item of high value when there's no indicator telling us so? This is where ignorance is bliss. When we first enter a game with little to no knowledge of it, every item we find is only worth what we personally make it. When we as the player become more experienced and start to understand the economy, we become more familiar with what items are worth taking up the inventory space. So time is an investment. We spend time gathering supplies, and if we die in an instant, that time is wasted. And that other player has now reaped the rewards we spent hours and hours working toward. That other player now has your stuff. Envy. What's mine isn't yours, it's mine. Jealousy and envy play a major role in why we care so much when we lose at anything. In Escape From Tarkov, as players obtain loot, that loot then becomes a part of the overall circulation. Unless they sell your stuff, that gear will never be lost to the void. A big part of the frustration when losing items to another player is not that you've personally lost said items, but more so, that person has obtained them. This is where the insurance mechanic comes into play in Escape from Tarkov. Before you enter the raid, you can choose to spend in-game money to insure your items. This means that if you die and your items are not collected by a player, you will get those items back within an allotted time frame. In my experience, the emotions, the frustration I felt when dying was on a whole other level when faced with another player, because I knew they had my items and I would not be getting them back. Whereas if I was to die to the computer AI, I know there's a high probability I'll see those items again, because the AI cannot loot me. There's still an element of uncertainty and frustration, but nowhere near the levels after an engagement with a player. This gear fear can potentially hinder the user experience also not only for themselves, but for others. If more players succumb to this mindset, we'll have more players running around with only a melee weapon, which will reduce the amount of firefights and potential epic encounters for everyone. This aspect comes down to game design. When you choose to load into a raid with only a melee weapon, as we mentioned before, you risk nothing but potentially gain a large amount of profit. Not only that, but the melee weapon can be a very effective tool, which can instantly kill unless you bought proper head protection. But on the other end of the spectrum, this promotes the other users to outfit themselves appropriately to counter this. Now obviously this is unique to Escape from Tarkov, as that's what I'm most familiar with, so we'll stay in that realm. As Escape from Tarkov is in its early development stage, things need to be balanced further than it already is. The game is supposed to be a realistic shooter and it excels in almost all departments. But sometimes realism gets in the way of fun. And because it's in its early development stages, issues with the core game can come into play as well. When you fail and die, 9 times out of 10 you can sit back and assess how the situation unfolded. What could have you done differently? How could have you approached that engagement in a different manner? These all fall into the emotions we feel when we die, knowing that you was bested, but with that comes experience and learning. As you become more familiar and confident with the game, you know after each engagement various things you could have done differently, even if you were to come out victorious. It's an experience about learning and adapting with only really yourself to blame. Most of the time. With buggy AI, questionable hitboxes, player ghosts, and desync, sometimes you can't help but blame the game. And this is doubly rage-inducing, as there was nothing you could have done apart from not be there in that particular moment. But that is the nature of the beast. The more you play any game that has a permanent death mechanic, the more numb you become to failure. Instead of it being the be-all and end-all, it comes down to simply shrugging it off and starting again. As I first started playing this game, I started just like everyone else. I had the default stash size that came preloaded with some minuscule equipment which was lost within the first day. Every piece of equipment, every bit of money was sacred to me and I did not want to lose it. It held this weird sentimental value. This is mine, and I'm not confident enough to use it. On those rare occasions I did, I lost it. And then I started learning the maps, learning the weapon ballistics, and using the rifles. As I became more familiar with it, my confidence grew. I was winning more fights, and those pesky melee users were no longer a problem. I envisioned an almost tier-like system in my head. Melee users were at the bottom, average gear in the middle, and fully geared at the top. When I was fully geared, that tier system was in full effect, and I had less things to worry about, as I knew how to approach situations that would in turn increase my survival rate. Then I was granted a press kit, and everything changed. A press kit in Escape from Tarkov comes with the latest gear to showcase to the community, and a lot of money in-game to use. This is mine, and no one else's, I said to myself. I didn't want anyone else to have this gear, Not because I didn't want high tier loot in circulation at the start of a wipe, but I wanted bragging rights. I had achieved endgame loot, and all I had to do was log in. That grind you have to endure to reach that level was no longer there. I had no reason to play. Loot I found on players was no longer a reward. I no longer had that feeling of sheer excitement when I found the motherload of gear. I felt nothing. So I deleted it. In my eyes, after experiencing the game felt the most rewarding at the start, when you were scavenging for scraps, not when you have so much in-game money you don't know what to do with it. I started using only what I found inside the world. No traders, only the loot I stripped from my enemies' cold dead hands. Every piece of equipment I found had a certain story attached to it. So go out there, use your loot. You've earned it. Not only use your loot, but lose it. Welcome the addition of another challenge to go gather your belonging. Play the game. Team up with your buddies and kill enemy players. Use the gun. Explore the maps and get ready to die. Because at the end of the day, it's only pixels.